For this yarn, I made a boomerang etched all over with this symbol. Trends and surprises emerge within the whole design, and what seems like chaos has patterns and shapes that you can only discern with a holistic view. Contemporary science is beginning to understand this way of knowing through chaos theory, complexity theory, network theory, and fractal geometry. It is becoming clear that complex systems are adaptive, self-organizing, and patterned with a logic that can be discerned and used for trend analysis and predictive technologies. Second-wave automation, artificial intelligence, and blockchain technologies seek to harness this complexity. But it is a complexity that cannot function through external design and control. You could create a mechanical ballet by programming a group of rolling robots to move in sync. But your program would be a closed system, designed from the outside. One robot would get bumped an inch out of place, and the whole thing would fall apart. You can do it cheaper and faster just by letting a dozen of those little vacuum cleaner robots loose together in a space to move randomly. At first, they will just clean the floor individually, but over time, maybe the rhythms of creation will begin to move them together as they start to dance in patterns that are more startling than anything a single programmer might design, like schools of fish in the sea. Consider boids, which are digital objects that move on a screen. When you place a number of boids on a screen, with 3 or 4 simple rules telling each to match the velocity of the others, move randomly, and avoid collisions, after a while, they will begin to move together as a group in complex patterns resembling the flocking of birds. These patterns cannot be programmed, but must emerge within the system organically, a process that is called random in Western worldviews, but is in fact following the patterns of creation. Similarly, effective artificial intelligence is not created simply through programming. It is more efficient to program a simple AI and let it loose on a complex system of data. As it moves through the data, it becomes a learning entity and programs itself autonomously. A blockchain cannot be designed externally as a closed system, or it will stagnate. It must comprise individual nodes that remain autonomous, operating freely in a self-organizing system of users. The internet also developed in this way. The kinds of digital innovations that are currently disrupting top-down global economic and social structures are built on the reality of complex, self-organizing systems rather than the illusion of centralized control. This has implications for the management of all systems, particularly social control systems. Community members like boids, birds, fish, or nodes need to operate autonomously under 3 or 4 basic rules, self-organizing within groups, spaces, and data sets to form complex learning communities. The patterns and innovations emerging from these ecosystems of practice are startling and transformative, and cannot be designed or maintained by a single manager or external authority. They cannot even be imagined outside of a community operating this way. This is the perspective you need to be a custodian rather than an owner of lands, communities, or knowledge. It demands the relinquishing of artificial power and control, immersion in the astounding patterns of creation that only emerge through the free movement of all agents and elements within a system. This impacts the way we are managed and governed. Pre-industrial cultures have worked within self-organizing systems for thousands of years to predict weather patterns, seasonal activity, and the dynamics of social groups, then manage responses to these complexities in non-intrusive ways that maintain systemic balance. While interventions are possible from within these dynamic systems, they cannot be controlled from the outside. Systems are hierarchical, composed of equal parts interacting together. Imposing a hierarchical model of top-down control can only destroy them. Healthy interventions can only be made by free agents within a complex system, agents referred to in chaos theory as strange attractors. Could you be a strange attractor within your institution? It is a risky endeavor in a culture that attaches negative meanings to words like chaos and anarchy, equating them with disorder and ruin. But chaos in reality has a structure that produces innovation, and anarchy simply means no boss. Could it be possible to have structure without bosses? In my community, there is a phrase that is repeated daily: "Nobody boss for me." Yet at the same time, each person is bound within complex patterns of relatedness and communal obligation. Indigenous models of governance are based on respect for social, ecological, and knowledge systems and all their components or members. Complex kinship structures reflect the dynamic design of natural systems through totemic relationships with plants and animals. Totems can also include other elements of these systems, like wind, lightning, body parts, and substances. The whole is intelligent, and each part carries the inherent intelligence of the entire system. Knowledge is therefore a living thing that is patterned within every person, and being, and object, and phenomenon within creation. Respectful observation and interaction within the system, with the parts and the connections between them, is the only way to see the pattern. You cannot know any part, let alone the whole, without respect. You cannot come to knowledge without it. Each part, each person is dignified as an embodiment of the knowledge. Respect must be facilitated by custodians. But there is no outsider-imposed authority, no boss, no dominion over. While senior people ensure that the processes and stages of coming to higher levels of knowledge are maintained with safety and cohesion, there is no centralized control in Aboriginal societies. Western knowledge systems are centralized, and this could be why they have so far been unable to engage in dialogue with Indigenous knowledge systems in the development of sustainability solutions. It could also be part of the reason I have so much trouble bringing Indigenous knowledge processes into dialogue with the Academy. The other part being that people are too busy filing reports, performance reviews, and funding proposals in these institutions to have any time for complex Indigenous knowledge. It's far easier to collect, bag, and tag samples from our culture, but nobody says that. Mostly, academics tell me that they're unable to incorporate Indigenous knowledge into the Academy because their students are not smart enough to understand it. This is frustrating. It is accepted that in the Academy we study examples of knowledge mastery and the finest thinking available in our field. There is no reason the same standard should not be applied to Aboriginal knowledge, which is no more or less accessible than ideal gas equations or genetic sequences. No matter how difficult a topic is, there are always simple points of entry and general principles and processes to be gleaned by novices encountering it for the first time. We have the same thing in Indigenous cultures, stages of knowledge and no progression without mastery and respect. It just requires a bit of discernment, humility, and awareness. It is easy enough to observe, listen, and gradually increase your participation as your mastery increases. When I first began to read Dante back when I was 20, I didn't need in-depth knowledge to start engaging with his unfamiliar ideas and cultural perspective. Within an hour of my first encounter with his Inferno, I had mapped out all the layers of hell and decided which level each of my enemies was headed for. It made me feel so much better. Thank you, Dante. After that, I went overboard and spent a year learning the Florentine dialect so that I could read the original text. But I can't say this in-depth study helped me understand European people any better. To be honest, I was really only studying Dante in his dialect to show off and try to impress college girls. It worked sometimes, but never with the European ones. There's a lesson there. First, check your ego and your motives. Why are you doing this? Second, you don't need to be an expert to understand the knowledge processes of people from other cultures and enter into dialogues with them. More important, making yourself an expert in another culture is not always appreciated by the members of that culture. Understanding your own culture and the way it interacts with others, particularly the power dynamics of it, is far more appreciated. My reading of Germaine Greer when I was a young lad was a lot more conducive to forming relationships with European females than my reading of Dante was. And that was more about understanding my male privilege and controlling its excesses than being an expert on women's literature or issues. This kind of cultural humility is a useful exercise in understanding your role as an agent of sustainability in a complex system. It is difficult to relinquish the illusions of power and delusions of exceptionalism that come with privilege, but it is strangely liberating to realize your true status as a single node in a cooperative network. There is honor to be found in this role, and a certain dignified agency. You won't be swallowed up by a hive mind or lose your individuality. You will retain your autonomy, while simultaneously being profoundly interdependent and connected. In fact, sustainable systems cannot function without the full autonomy and unique expression of each independent part of the interdependent whole. Sustainability agents have a few simple operating guidelines, or network protocols, or rules, if you like. Diversify, connect, interact, and adapt. Diversity is not about tolerating difference or treating others equally and without prejudice. The diversification principle compels you to maintain your individual differences, particularly from other agents who are similar to you. This prevents you from clustering into narcissistic flash mobs. You must also seek out and interact with a wide variety of agents who are completely dissimilar to you. Finally, you must interact with other systems beyond your own, keeping your system open and therefore sustainable. Connectedness balances the excesses of individualism in the diversity principle. The first step in connectedness is forming pairs, like kinship pairs, with multiple other agents who also pair with others. The next step is creating or expanding networks of these connections. The final step is making sure these networks are interacting with the networks of other agents, both within your system and in others. Interaction is the principle that provides the energy and spirit of communication to power the system. This principle facilitates the flow of living knowledge. For this, you must be transferring knowledge and energy and resources with as many other agents as possible, rather than trying to store it individually. If the world ever experiments with an actual free market rather than an oligopoly, this would be the perfect system to facilitate sustainable interactions. Knowledge, value, and energy in truly sustainable networks of interaction are prevented from remaining static and unchanging by the final protocol. Adaptation is the most important protocol of an agent in a sustainable system. You must allow yourself to be transformed through your interactions with other agents and the knowledge that passes through you from them. This knowledge and energy will flow through the entire system in feedback loops, and you must be prepared to change so that those feedback loops are not blocked. An agent that is truly adaptive and changing is open to sudden eruptions of transformation, in which the agent may temporarily take on the role of a strange attractor and facilitate chain reactions of creative events within the system. You can see these principles embedded throughout Aboriginal culture. I can see many of them just looking at our first-person pronouns. In English, these are I or me and we or us. In Aboriginal languages, there are many more, including pronouns that are translated as I myself, we too, we but not others, and we all together. Repeating the plural ones twice can mean, it's up to us. But repeating I twice can mean, I go my own way. There is a balance between self-definition and group identity. These two are not contradictory, but entwined, and there are names for all the roles you occupy as an agent of complexity in Aboriginal society. You perform these roles alone, in pairs, in exclusive groups, and in networked groups. Our languages are expressions of land-based networks and facilitate communication across all of these individual nodes and collectives of nodes within and between systems. In Aboriginal English, there is a very useful term to help us draw lines in the sand between these roles, asserting both boundaries and connections. The word is lookout, a term I believe we originally borrowed from Cockneys, which is not a warning, but refers to a person's appropriate sphere of influence and accountability. If a person is being pushy and expecting you to get involved with his frantic business in an effort to control you, you might say, that's not my lookout, or nah, that's your lookout. Your lookout encompasses all of your reasonable obligations and activities within your pairs, groups, and wider networks. By reasonable, I mean any tasks that reflect the other protocols of a sustainability agent, leaving you free to be different from others, receive and transfer knowledge, and transform in response to shifting contexts, while acting as a custodian and defender of these things. You have to keep moving, both as a strange attractor and as a sustainability agent. If you are following the 4 protocols of working within the pattern, little systems of vibrant complexity will spring up around you, and other strange attractors will draw you into their amazing webs. These will attract other agents, but they will also attract narcissists in droves. You need to insulate yourself against these entropic elements, but you also have a responsibility to help them. We have looked at Emu's story, but it's also worth looking at stories from the Northern Hemisphere to discern the patterns of narcissism that prevent the functioning of sustainable systems. The word narcissist comes from a Greek story about Narcissus, a man who fell in love with his own reflection in the water. A girl called Echo was in love with him, but she was cursed to hang around and only repeat his words forever. This is what you find with these narcissist flash mobs. One loud person will start shouting silly things and attract followers who repeat those things without thought. Not all strange attractors are benevolent. Narcissism isn't incurable, though. Survivors of this plague emerge without any memory of who they really are, needing support to begin again and relearn the nature of their existence, their purpose for being here. They are like children, and leaving them to their own devices at this stage is not advisable. Entire cultures and populations recovering from this plague have been left like orphan children with no memories of who they are, longing for a pattern they know is there but can't see. They grow up eventually, but it takes a long time if they have no assistance. There are so many adolescent cultures in the world right now, reaching for the stars without really knowing what they are. Adolescent cultures always ask the same 3 questions. Why are we here? How should we live? What will happen when we die? The first one I've covered already, with the role of humans as a custodial species.